It was like a homecoming for Bob Carr, returning to the Labor heartland his party had lost in 1988.
We've just come back to say thank you to the people of the Hunter for voting for us.
Congratulations on
Yes, thank you very much.
Labor was returned in 8 of the Hunter's 9 seats, a resounding victory both for the party and Bob Carr's leadership. But doing the rounds of local radio stations, Mr Carr admitted he hadn't expected such a strong response.
Were doubts, all the polls were against us. The experts were paying sycophantic attention to Mr Greiner. I had no alternative but to fight.
While the Coalition's campaign was short on issues in the Hunter, the Labor Party highlighted government taxes, privatisation of mines and education, a back-to-basics approach which paid dividends. Mr Carr was given a civic reception at City Hall by Lord Mayor John McNaughton. In an address to the party faithful, including the Hunter's Labor members, Mr Carr warned the party should not get out of touch with the electorate. He said the ALP had learnt in the past that arrogance was a surefire way to lose office. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
G and his solicitor said little during the hearing and things didn't change afterwards. The Gold Coast second rower was suspended for 6 matches but has only 5 left to serve after standing down from last week's clash with Easts. He'd originally been charged with attacking the head and kneeing the groin of Knights hooker David Mullane, but the judiciary ruled it was not clear where the knee had struck. Mullane was left in agony after the incident and had to undergo surgery on his lower groin as a result. But because no Knights representatives attended the hearing, the judiciary assumed no injury was caused. The good news for Mullane is that he could be back on the paddock in as little as 2 weeks.
Australian hardwoods, or the eucalypt species, were once used to make the hard-wearing, durable furniture we now call antiques. But as the timber was heavy and difficult to work with, Australians found it far easier to import timber for furniture making. As a result, the Australian hardwoods were left to the building industry. But in the next few years, we could see a re-emergence of hardwood furniture. Peter van Herk is carrying out research and development on the timber at his gallery and workshop near Gloucester. With funding from the Timber Advisory Council, Peter is developing joints and designs specific to Australian hardwoods.
What we've done is we've decreased the size of the section of the timber so that the stresses are less, but as a consequence we've had to redesign joints. And the joints that we've designed have been orientated towards commercial production.
Ordinary furniture crafted this fine would collapse under pressure, but these specially designed hardwood pieces can withstand almost anything.
This chair is spotted gum. It's one of Australia's strongest timbers, and probably one of the strongest timbers in the world.
Can a normal chair stand that?
Well, I'd ask people to do that to their own chairs. I doubt whether they will.
Although Peter believes the furniture will sell in Australia, the real market, he says, exists overseas. All that's needed now is an investor.
Australian hardwoods are unique to Australia, and that if overseas manufacturers wish to make these sorts of designs, they're going to have to come here and buy our timbers. So we're hoping that in 10, 15 years people will see these sorts of designs and they'll say that looks like an Australian design because it's very fine, very elegant, very durable, no matter where it's made in the world, because essentially it comes from our resources.
Suzanne Grant's body was found by council workers yesterday, dumped in a garbage tip on the outskirts of Brisbane. Her hands tied, her face wrapped in clothing. Police investigations led to the girl's family base in Tanilba Bay. Suzanne and her de facto husband and child recently spent 2 weeks with her parents. It's believed the Grants had seen little of their daughter in 5 years. Raymond Terrace detectives interviewed Mr. and Mrs. Grant for more than 2 hours today. Their daughter was known to the police. The township of Tanilba was shocked by the murder, a great tragedy for the family, which is well respected in the area.
Nice family,
Ted Grant comes in and he's been to the shop. Mrs. Grant's been in with him. Really nice people.
Brisbane police are tonight questioning a Sydney man in connection with the murder. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The Synod is made up of representatives from all over the diocese, 300 people representing every parish and all our chaplaincies. And the aim of the charge is to give them an idea of where the diocese is at the present time and some of the issues confronting the diocese and confronting society and the world.
Just then you mentioned that it's about issues confronting the diocese. Is the ordination of women one of those issues?
Yes, it is one, but that confronts the national church. At the moment, the legality of the ordination of women is being considered by what we call the appellate tribunal, which is like the High Court of the Church. And in 2 or 3 months' time, a decision will be made whether it's constitutionally possible. If the answer is yes, then the ordination of women will proceed.
Well, do you think that's likely?
I think so, yes, because on the whole, something like 70% of Anglicans in Australia believe that the ordination of women is the right way to proceed. And I think eventually such a huge majority will find its way to proceed with the ordination of women.
What's been the response in the local area to the ordination of women?
In our synod, they gave me permission 2 or 3 years ago to proceed when I believed it appropriate. And there was something like a 75% majority vote for that. So in our synod, I would think it's very high indeed. I would think in the world it's even higher than that. I'm often embarrassed that we're hung up on this issue, because in the world, discrimination against women is a thing of the past.
In your charge, you mentioned the phrase, we treat people like animals. What's behind that?
I've been speaking to priests recently about couples who divorce, and the people who are hurt are not only the man and the wife, but the children in the marriages. And priests have been telling me recently about the terrible ways in which children have been treated when divorces are anticipated. And one priest said to me the other day, we seem to treat people like animals, and it's a remark that's remained with me. And in the charge I'm trying to say, look, human beings are very important. They're sons and daughters of God, and more than anything else, we should treat people as human beings.
Increasingly, we're seeing more and more pressures on people, and in your charge you mentioned some things that concern you. Would that include things like the recession and the corruption in the political system?
Yes, it does. I've said in the charge that although there's a great deal of corruption, and apparently so, in the land at the present time, the church mustn't be too holier than thou, because the church has got to look at itself as well as look at the world. And if there's any corruption in the church, we've got to get rid of that. Nevertheless, it seems to me that we're going through a very difficult time at the present. I think our trust in political leaders, especially, is at an all-time low. And I think this distrust of leadership goes right the way through the community.
Well, how do you suggest our leaders improve their credibility?
We require a spiritual renewal. Now, I'm not being religious in using that expression. I really believe that most of our problems have a spiritual basis. And if we can get the spiritual basis right, other things will flow.
Bishop Holland, thanks for your time.
Under tight security, the stone was brought into the studios of NBN for its first public airing, appearing on a pre-recorded segment of This Morning. The stone has been locked in a bank vault in Hunter Street since it was discovered by a local businessman 10 years ago while fossicking in Queensland's Opalton.
The gentleman found was a little bit nervous about making a public announcement that he had it, and he didn't quite know how to go about it. So he just kept quiet for 10 years.
The 2.65 kilogram jewel has never been seen, but experts believe it's a world treasure and should be displayed in a museum. A boulder opal usually has the gem on one side only, but this stone has 4 sides covered with gleaming opal. The only other stone of this grade ever found is called the Imperial. It's now in a museum in London after King Edward VII gave it up for superstitious reasons in 1901. It's believed to be smaller than this specimen. It's difficult to put a price on the opal. A conservative estimate is $5 million, but the real value can only be determined by auction.
Well, the owner has named it the rainforest, and if you study the stone, you will see a rainforest effect on 4 sides of it. It's the best piece of boulder opal I've ever laid my eyes on, yes.
The stone will be the centrepiece of the Craft, Gem and Treasure exhibition, which starts Friday at the Newcastle Showground.
Makeup was checked, ties were knotted and the gloss applied. The final dress rehearsal of the musical Polly's was held in front of students from neighbouring schools. It takes a light-hearted look at politics.
It's about the people in general and the ordinary, everyday people who run up against the different world of the politicians and bureaucracy and how they, I suppose, overcome that.
Polly's will run for a week, and as some politicians know, a week in politics can be a long time. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
The celebrations might be premature, but considering the state the Wyong Race Club was in 6 years ago, every race day must now seem like a blessing.
The Minister and the bank at the time had ceased trotting and ceased the greyhound racing and also ceased the agricultural show. All of those 3 codes were actually losing money. And the bank, of course, didn't want to tolerate them anymore, and the Minister closed them down, and the only thing that was going was gallops at the time.
The champagne corks will really start popping in 6 weeks' time when the club's pride and joy, a new $6.5 million grandstand complex, is opened. Officials say it's indicative of the way the club's stature has grown in recent years.
I believe that we were entitled to it because every other competitive club around us was getting grandstands and we were being left a little bit in the shade, so we decided we'd come out into the sunlight and try, and we succeeded.
That success meant a $100 million turnover last year and a clear profit of more than $750,000. The racing industry is now the second biggest in the Shire and has no intention of settling for a minor placing.
Harness racing is probably an area we can improve because once we've got the facilities open, we're going to be the best harness racing complex out of anywhere out of Sydney.
The residents of Shedden Street say that until recently, the area has been idyllic.
It's always been a fairly quiet street and the residents fairly easygoing and a very close-knit community.
But they say their quality of life is being shattered by a telephone escort agency operating from a house in their street.
I'm concerned for my own children, the welfare and other children in the street. I do not want them exposed to any moral or any dangers which is going to affect them adversely or anybody in the street.
There are 8 elderly widows in the neighbourhood. One is trying to sell her house. Another, Laura Clifton, says she's disturbed by the nightly noise.
Well, I've had to move out of my bedroom into a back bedroom and for the noise of it and the cars in the street. The only time that our street was quiet was when she took the phone off the hook.
The service, called La Femme Bella, is operated by a Ms Gilda Hay. When we called at Ms Hay's house today, there was no answer and the windows were all shut. Neighbours say Ms Hay was seen leaving early this morning. Also, her business number is engaged. According to council authorities, the phone has been taken off the hook. A development application for the service goes before Cessnock City Council this month, but the residents say it's been operating for at least 9 months. In her application, Ms Hay writes, there are 3 ladies employed. All ladies work from their own homes. No lady works from this address. Although Ms Hay argues in her application that there's a real need for the service in Cessnock, the neighbours are not the only ones opposed to the agency being in the heart of a residential area.
I'm firmly against it as well. The people in that block are very, very concerned. There are 9 elderly widows in that particular block. They're living in fear. It's not fair to them. They shouldn't have this end of their life living in fear.
Serving morning tea to a ravenous group of customers is daunting for any restaurant staff member. For Glass Gold, it represents a major achievement. The students are intellectually disabled and have spent weeks acquiring the skills needed to run a coffee shop.
It takes in their reading, their writing, their home ec experience that they have in the home ec department, their art experience. I just feel that the children lack opportunities of doing TAFE courses. At the moment we're unable to do those, and I wanted to provide a work experience program so that they can have a vocational training.
Today's official opening went off without a hitch. Scrumptious scones and steaming hot cups of tea and coffee served to hungry patrons. Everything, right down to food preparation, was done by the students.
And we do the shopping, the cooking, the presentation. They've organised the tablecloths, they wash and iron the tablecloths, do the floral decorations, fold serviettes, set tables, then they serve. Then in the last part they will do the clearing off and the washing up.
And in charge of washing up, Matthew Minter, a man who could easily win any woman's heart.
And do you like washing up the dishes?
Yes, I love it.
Why do you like it?
It's good for the work.
What I would say to you today is very simple. The first thing I want is it ought to remain in the public sector, generating profit. The other house, the vote's still being counted and could get in at the expense of Fred Mine. And we'll know on Friday, the public will say, we've had enough of you, solutions are. I don't think Grant is going to risk that again. I just don't think he will.
Well, do you think those...
I think they've had second thoughts about locking themselves in. I think our challenge is to work, step up our efforts in the end. And you are locked into supporting that.
Political suicide.
The sale of the Elcom mines was one issue which helped Bob Carr regain Labor's foothold in the Hunter Valley. Campaigning in the area just days before the election, Mr Carr promised to keep the 9 mines under public ownership while corporatising each under separate management. Today, at a meeting with miners at Warners Bay, Mr Carr reaffirmed that commitment, saying the Greiner government no longer has a mandate to sell the mines.
I think Mr Greiner wants to sell them off. He said his program will go ahead, and that means asset sales like the sale of these mines. We're going to oppose it all the way in the Parliament, and we're going to court to see that it gets to the Parliament.
Mr Carr says he has not yet spoken to the 4 independents who hold the balance of power in the lower house, but he believes there is a strong chance 3 of them will vote with the opposition in opposing the sale. He also sees a similar situation in the upper house.
The issue of the future of the mines will have to go to Parliament. Once it gets there, we've got a chance of defeating it, especially if an independent Green wins the position in the upper house instead of Fred Nile. So it's still very much up in the air.
Although Nick Greiner has been allowed to form a minority government, Mr Carr has not yet conceded defeat. That depends upon tomorrow's High Court challenge.
Mr Greiner changed the rules. I mean, Mr Greiner is only back there as Premier now because he changed the rules on an unsuspecting public and because 300,000 votes were struck out because they recorded ticks or crosses. I mean, that's the only reason he's back. And that's why we say the government's got no mandate to carry out any of the privatisation Mr Greiner's talking about. And that's why we say this government's got no legitimacy.
In the 13 years of the NBL, the Falcons have had more practice than any other team at replacing members of the playing staff. Nearly every season an import player has been sent home, and this week another one hit the road, Jerry Everett. The brilliant Everett was involved in an ugly incident with Chris Deal at practice on Monday night, and after consultation with management, his contract was terminated. Immediately the call went out to the United States for a replacement, and if everything falls into place in the next few hours, Creighton University's Bob Harstad will become a Falcon.
He's about 6'7", very solid white ball player that we think could really fill the bill for us, and we can't quite find him. So his agent is trying desperately to find him to give us a word because we have to give them a name. This is an anomaly in the NBL rules. So if we can't come up with a name by tomorrow, a definite name, then we can't replace the American.
But more immediate problems for coach Ken Cole are the matches against the Gold Coast tomorrow night and the Sydney Kings on Saturday night. How will the players react to the worries of the week?
I don't know whether or not we can cover the loss of a player as good as that out of the team, particularly with a couple of other people that have struggled. But they may not struggle anymore without Jerry there.
This is another face of the economic recession. These foals were left without food and water when a stud owner in the Upper Hunter couldn't maintain his mortgage payments and deserted the property. The RSPCA was called in when there was simply no money to keep the animals alive. The RSPCA is receiving 50 animals a month, mostly from distraught owners who are stretched to the limit.
They simply admit, if you like, that times are too tough financially. They cannot keep this animal any longer.
Those found to be mistreating animals could face a 6-month jail term plus a $2,000 fine. Stock owners are warned to sell off their animals before it's too late. And for those looking to buy a new pet, a hard piece of economic advice.
Budget for it. Budget for your veterinary expenses and for the feed and care that is necessary for these animals.
Hairdresser Raquel Goose of the Sheer Heavens Salon in the Hunter Village was alone in the shop at about 11:30 this morning when her ordeal began.
I was standing over there cleaning up and the man came to the front desk and I just come and asked, may I help him? And he just lifted up his flannelette shirt and started to pull a knife out of his pocket.
But the robbery was abandoned when the offender heard a customer coming.
A client of mine was out at the ladies and she closed the back door and it slammed a little bit and then he quickly went out the shop.
Since the robbery, the police have been patrolling the streets. They're fearful that since this attempt failed, the offender might try again.
Looking for a male in his late 20s, about 170 centimetres tall, with long shoulder-length brown wavy hair, short on top, wearing a blue flannelette shirt and dark blue jeans.